There's always the need to come back for more creepy stories, bedtime horror tales, and too weird to be true information. Stay tuned for more as we've got you covered. Take a sneak peek at some weird facts that would surely have you rethinking why you never thought of these things before.
Nightmarish facts about your body that you probably shouldn't think about. Part 2. The water you drink has probably been inside of someone or something else. Constipation can make you vomit poop. A teratoma is a rare type of tumor that can grow hair, teeth, bones, intestines, and more. There is a bloody skeleton living inside of you. Bone dust smells like Cool Ranch Doritos. This is what the MRI of a baby looks like. Holy shit.
Want some dirty history facts that you won't be taught in school? Well, here you have it.
Dirty facts about history that school probably didn't teach you. Part 6. Greeks, Romans, and Spartans were really into anal for both sexes. Male warriors would do it as a sign of camaraderie and brotherhood, and women would do it before marriage as they only had to be vaginal virgins to get married. The first ever condoms were made of discarded animal parts, such as pig intestines and lambskin. Queen Victoria's oldest son, King Edward VII, had a love chair custom made for having sex with multiple people at the same time. The same chair later sold for $4 million. In ancient Greece, large peepees were a sign that someone was foolish or stupid, which is why many statues depict small peepees, because this was a sign of intellect. When Phryne, an Athenian on trial in ancient Greece, flashed her boobs to the court, the judges thought they were so perfect that they decided to spare her life.
Did you know that every time you high-five a fellow human, you both are basically high-fiving nothingness? Watch this clip for more blood-curdling facts.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 26. Atoms are 99% nothing, which makes us 99% nothing as well. Also, if you come in contact with someone or something, you're not actually touching them. You're simply sensing the repulsion between your atoms and theirs. You can get bed bugs from movie theater seats. In 1386, a French pig was publicly executed for the murder of a child. The pig was given full legal representation and provided human clothes for the trial. A 7-year-old South African girl is more likely to be raped than to receive an education. In the 1950s, many babies in orphanages didn't cry very often because they knew their cries wouldn't be answered. Hans Langseth, the man with the longest beard in history, died when he tripped over it and cracked his neck. The maximum prison sentence in Brazil is 30 years, meaning that mass murderers like Pedro Rodrigues Filho, who killed over 100 people, are walking free today.
Horror movies depict a bit of reality, right? That's what makes them scary, and this kid's movie isn't left out.
Horror movie facts that will haunt your nightmares. Part 2. Coraline. The soundtrack in the movie is a French children choir singing. Surprisingly, they aren't actually singing in French. They're singing in a completely made-up language. If you look on the wall of the dining room in the other mother's home, you'll see 3 portraits of silhouettes. These likely represent the 3 ghost children that appear later in the film. In the normal world, the boy is sad and has dropped his ice cream. But in the other world, he's happy and his ice cream is perfect. On the back of the chair above where Coraline's doll sits features a small flower-shaped pattern. And this flower is almost exactly like the one on the back of Jack Torrance's chair in The Shining. The Welcome Home cake features a double loop on the O. And according to graphology, a double loop on the lowercase o means that the person who wrote it is not telling the truth. But on the cake, there is actually only one double loop, meaning that Coraline is welcome, but she is not home.
Ever seen the eerie card game named Illuminati Word Order? Find out why it was discontinued.
Could this card game be warning us of the future? In the 1990s, a man named Steve Jackson created a card game called Illuminati New World Order. Conspiracy theorists all around the world were quick to snap up the game due to its conspiracist title. However, people who started to play the game began to notice something very disturbing. The game was predicting many of the world's major historical disasters and events years before it actually happened, and it was eerily accurate. Eventually, the game was discontinued. But who was really behind this card game? And
who breaks into people's houses only to give them a cut and steal chunks of their hair? Beware of the Phantom Barber.
who was the Phantom Barber? In 1942, the residents of Pascagoula, Mississippi began to notice that they were waking up with lots of hair missing from their head, and their house was being broke into. However, nothing was ever stolen and no one was ever hurt. The series of events continued, and the locals quickly referred to this man as the Phantom Barber. Eventually, a man named William Dolan was arrested, and strands of hair were found all around his property. It was said that Dolan also recently had a disagreement with the last family that were victims of the Phantom Barber. Even though he was convicted for attempted murder, this case still remains a mystery, as there wasn't any hard evidence for his incrimination, leading many to have doubts as to
if a man has a split personality disorder and the other part of him likes to do bad things to people, who should be held responsible for the crime?
How many women did this man actually kill? In 1958, there were several disappearances of young women being reported, and at the center of it was this man named Tony Costa. In his daily life, Tony Costa seemed to be a charming man, but he had a split personality named Corey, and Corey had a thirst for blood. As it was spring break and party season, Tony lured women into a graveyard, promising them drugs and a good time. But as soon as they were in his trap, he would kill them and dismember them. As it was the 1960s, and there were so many teens coming in and out of Cape Cod, it took months before police officers took any of these disappearances seriously. Patricia Walsh, Mary Ann Wysocki, Susan Perry, and Sidney Mazzone were confirmed victims of Tony Costa, but investigators think that there are many more. So,
it turns out there is no limit to those who can be haunted by ghosts, and apparently celebrities aren't left out.
did Miley Cyrus help a ghost cross over? During her Bangers World Tour, Miley Cyrus was staying in an old apartment in London when she noticed a couple of creepy things. One evening when she was showering, she saw a small boy sitting on the sink, watching her. Later, her mom got upset at her because apparently she and her little sister, Noah, went to investigate to see what was going on. It was only after her aunt and her fiancé at the time, Liam Hemsworth, started to notice weird things when they started taking things seriously. Through her investigations, Miley found out that there was a bakery in the building that many years ago was owned by an old ailing man and his sick wife. When the two passed away, they gave the bakery to his son, who mysteriously died. Miley thought she was seeing the young son and claimed that the haunting stopped after she realized that. So,
turns out the government is always trying one scary project or another, and no one told these men the result of these experiments would be deadly.
this experiment took the lives of many. In 1932, 600 black men were recruited for a study, now known as the Tuskegee Experiment in Alabama. Out of 600 men, 399 of them suffered from syphilis. This study promised free medical care for the rest of their lives. However, what the men did not know was that the purpose of the study was to track the full progression of the syphilis infection. It gets worse, as the medications that were administered were fake. In 1943, when penicillin was found to be the most common cure for syphilis, the men were denied it, as it would affect the study. Researchers watched as the progression got worse, and many went blind and insane. The study ran for close to 4 decades and eventually was shut down. However, it was too late, as 3/4 of the subjects had already lost their lives. Many now wonder if this experiment was sanctioned by the government and what else they could be doing behind closed doors, as
Do you really need a time machine to go back in time? In this man's case, he was just crossing a busy road.
this man traveled back in time. In 1996, an off-duty police officer named Frank was shopping with his wife on Bold Street in Liverpool. As she headed into Dylan's bookshop, Frank tried to cross the road to follow after her, but in his haste he was almost struck by a car. When he gathered his bearings and looked up, everything looked different. The bookshop Dylan's was gone, and in its place was a store called Cribs. As he went up and looked in the window, it was all women's clothing, but clothes that were very out of fashion. He looked around, but only to notice that everyone in and out of the shop dressed as if they were in the 40s or 50s. Suddenly, he noticed a young girl, dressed from the 90s, walking past him into the shop. He quickly chased after her, but when he got inside, it was no longer the clothing store, but Dylan's bookshop. Later that day, he recounted the event to his wife and she replied that Cribs was a department store in the 40s and 50s. So, did Frank step into a time portal? And is it possible that...
These are definitely things no one ever expected to see in this lifetime. Once seen, they can't be unseen.
Things that you weren't meant to see. Stingray eating a fish. An octopus riding on an eel while trying not to get eaten. Oh man, I guess he played it safe. This is what a cloud bursting looks like. Follow for more.
There are photos you take for fun, and there are some you take unsuspecting that you just shot a haunting memory.
3 photos with terrifying backstories. This photo was taken in the middle of the night from a Reddit user who swore they could hear noises coming from their kitchen. And it almost looks innocent until you zoom in. I don't like whatever was going on in there. A reminder too that if you like spooky things, you'll love my podcast. The most recent episode is all true ghost stories. This next photo was taken by a woman who was driving down an area in Connecticut that she said was haunted. She claimed she was taking a photo of one man walking, but when she looked back at the photo later, there were 2. And this photo looks harmless enough until you realize that the user used to have a cat that would do this to their toilet paper rolls. But the cat had passed away months before this photo was taken, and the user lives alone. So what do you think, haunted or not?
If you ever come face to face with the smiling man, you just might live to tell the tale.
I'd like to say at this point that I ran, or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all. But I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking at the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I had meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very, very slowly, and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back on him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to be almost out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time, he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He was completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Now, dear listener, I know a lot of you may not consider the smiling man a cryptid, but I just have a hard time believing he's human. He sounds more like a humanoid creature or possibly something demonic. So, with that said, the smiling man is one of the dozens of creatures featured in my new board game, Encounters, the cryptid hunting game. To learn more about the game and pre-order your copy, check out the link in my bio.
Do you know there's an urban legend of a smiling man? What's his story?
Creepy Cryptids from Around the World, Part 9. The Smiling Man. I couldn't find many details about the Smiling Man via research, so I figured for this one, I'd just share the original tale that gave birth to the urban legend. The following was posted to Reddit's No Sleep board by user Blue Title in April of 2012. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways away from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was on most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then I stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel with me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He did not move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him. And then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps as if he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. Except he was moving very, very quickly.
What is dead may never die, right? But it can be caught on a tape in an unsuspecting moment.
You want to see something freaky? We'll take a look at some old footage. This is from the Theodore Brill's assisted living community, and it's security footage from back in the 80s. This camera would just kind of generally face this hallway, but one night it caught something very eerie in this particular frame. Before we get into it, I have got to say thank you to you for making my podcast, Creep Time the Podcast, number 18 in the whole country. I'm very grateful. So if you have not listened to Creep Time the Podcast, go click the link in my bio. If you look to the background of this footage, on the right there appears to be an elderly woman just standing there. What really kind of freaked everybody out is that everybody recognized this woman. The staff could tell that this was Blanche Raymond. The problem is, Blanche Raymond died 2 years earlier in 1984. Still, the consensus from the staff is that the footage clearly shows who they recognize to be this woman. Just feasibly no explanation for it. How do we explain this footage?
Rumor has it that there's a zombie virus going around. Is it harmful? Would you rather be vaccinated than go on a zombie hunting spree?
Look at this video.
But do you know there could be another contender waiting in line, a dangerous contender known as the zombie fungus, a fungus that hacks the brain and could potentially turn one into a zombie.
Look at this one too.
About a potentially deadly fungus that's apparently spreading throughout hospitals.
Cases have been reported in at least 30 states.
No, I refuse to believe this. Right at the start of 2020, people stood up and shut the whole world down. No one's allowed to leave home. But today, COVID is harmless. No one cares if you're infected with the virus. It's just another flu, apparently. Billions of PCR COVID swabs were conducted. We paid. American, Chinese, and British vaccines were sold to governments worldwide. They told us about 72% of the world population got vaccinated. What you are seeing now could be one of those, boys, we made a lot of money. Let's do it one more time in 2024. I'm sure many of you have seen The Last of Us. Now, it is true, the type of zombie fungus that they refer to in the series is a real fungus. That does exist. However, based on health institutions, this fungus only affects insects and does not affect human beings. Yet, let's say it does, one day. Maybe some Chinese or American labs modify this fungus and they let it explore. We'll have zombies attacking us. I'm not getting vaccinated, bro. I'm going old school. And you should too.
Too much of everything is not good, they say. Well, eat too much of these foods and it might as well be suicide.
This is how much of different foods you need to eat to kill you, part 1. Up first is chocolate. You would have to eat 85 chocolate bars to die from chocolate. I really don't see anybody doing this unless they're actually trying to die from chocolate. But just a heads up, don't eat 85 chocolate bars in one sitting, because you will most likely die. Next up is one of everybody's favorite fruit, which is bananas. And you would have to eat 405 bananas in one sitting to die. I don't even think monkeys can do this, nonetheless a human being. But you would die from all the potassium you're getting and just overdose on it. Next up is cigarettes. You would have to smoke 71 cigarettes in a row to die. I honestly don't even think it's possible for one person to do this in one sitting. But if you do, you will most likely die, so I recommend not to do it.
This is as far as creepy stories go for now. Join us in the next video as we explore more.